Well, it's going to be a big day for the Indigenous voice to Parliament. Voting will open this morning in some of Australia's most remote locations. 2,000 staff from the Australian Electoral Commission will be stationed at 750 polling booths across the country. They'll be making sure everyone has the opportunity to cast their vote. Some of these communities have less than 20 voters. A few booths will be open for just one day due to the small size of these areas. And we're just a week away from pre-polls opening in New South Wales. From Tuesday next week, you'll be able to cast an early ballot, provided you have a valid reason. But as voting gets underway, the Yes campaign is worried. There are some fresh polls out today. Support for an Indigenous voice to Parliament has dropped again. The latest news poll shows support for the voice has fallen to 36%. The no vote now sits at 56%. That's news poll. The Financial Review's Freshwater poll has yes on 33%. That's a fall of 15 percentage points since May. So now 33% support. The no vote has risen to 50%. And over the weekend, we learned in the Redbridge poll that support for the voice has fallen to 39%, according to Redbridge. Senator Jacinta Price is the Shadow Indigenous Affairs Minister. She's in Sydney this morning and she's in the studio. Senator, good morning to you.
Good morning, Ben.
Is it over?
No, I wouldn't be saying that at all. We can't be complacent. We've got to make sure that, for those of us campaigning no, we have to continue to make sure that Australians are informed as to why we shouldn't be supporting this referendum going forward. So, yeah, absolutely not. We've still got until October 14.
Behind the scenes, though, I'm sure you and your colleagues on the no side would be saying, it's over. They're cooked. It's done.
Look, I'd say that there's definitely those that are suggesting that, but you can't always rely on polls. As much as the polls are looking great in favour of the no vote, we just, until the results are delivered, I'm not going to believe anything.
If it goes down, if the no vote gets up, there's going to be all sorts of analysis and expert opinion on what caused it to crash. And I've got many theories, and there are probably several factors that led to the decline in support. But is there a moment in time that you look back on and say, that's the moment when the tide turned?
Look, I think as Australians sought more information on this, and I think certainly when the Prime Minister suggested that he had not read the Uluru Statement in full, I think that's when Australians went, hang on a second, things aren't adding up quite right here. And Aussies don't like to be taken for a ride. And I think the more that Aboriginal voices have come forward to say we don't support this, that have largely been hidden, I think the more Australians are saying, realising, well, actually, do so many Aboriginal people support this thing?
I think the history books will record the moment in time that really changed things when you came out and said no, and Lydia Thorpe came out and said no, because you had two Indigenous women from very different walks of life and political persuasions both saying no. And in the no ad that you've released over the weekend, it's all Indigenous voices in there. And look, we know the Prime Minister says 80% of Indigenous Australians support the voice. That doesn't match up with that message stick poll that was out there that didn't show that level of support. And we haven't seen comprehensive data on how many Indigenous Australians support it. As you make your way around Indigenous communities and other communities talking to Indigenous people, honestly, and I know you're from the no side, but what's the feedback? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40 yes? 80-20 yes? What is it?
Look, I'd have to say, 70% no is sort of what I've been, engaged with. I mean, if I look as to somewhere like Alice Springs, just walking along through the streets, and particularly the way that I was out in a community a couple of days ago, and people are coming up to me, people in the bush, they are pretty sick of Aboriginal affairs being run by those in the city. And there's a bit of distrust there. And they've said to me, we're not supporting this. We can't support this because we don't feel like it's about us. Yet again, we feel it's coming from the city folk. And
but the Prime Minister would say that's why the voice is needed, so that it's not bureaucrats in big cities and in Canberra making decisions. It's coming from the people on the ground in Indigenous communities. That's why we need the voice.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, Aboriginal affairs has been pretty much controlled by those in the cities, academics, Indigenous academics, those who have gained university education, who are actually far removed from the circumstances on the ground in communities. And unfortunately, those positions of power have always been held by those individuals. And the Voice will just be another one of those platforms, only it'll be enshrined within the Constitution. And that's what a lot of the mob in Bush, that they tell me, Jacinta, you're our elected representative. We voted for others. That's who we just want to be part of the system that currently exists, but we just want people to actually hear us. We want people to listen to us. And there's been many examples where that's happened. Look, the cashless debit card. The Prime Minister didn't listen to the Aboriginal women, those voices that said, don't repeal that card. We need it. He listened to the academics in the cities. So there is absolutely no guarantee or demonstration as to how this is supposed to be about, finally, certainly this government listening to those voices in remote communities.
Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, the Shadow Indigenous Affairs Minister, is our guest in the studio this morning. Senator, what's your advice to people, myself included, who do not want to vote against Indigenous recognition in the Constitution?
Well, there's many of us that don't that do support recognition, but unfortunately the way this has been presented to the Australian people, we have this voice body attached to it, which is very dangerous. It should never have been done this way. If the Prime Minister had actually decided to have a genuine conversation with our leader, with Peter Dutton, about dropping the element of the voice body and just going with recognition, it would have been a no-brainer. All Australians would have been on board with that. But unfortunately, we've got this very divisive and dangerous proposition before us. And that's the problem with this.
But we're going to end up with no recognition for Indigenous Australians in the Constitution if we vote no on October 14. And for a lot of people, that's something that's really concerning them, the idea that after all of these years and all of the conversations about recognition, which is how this started out, we'll end up with no recognition. So where does that leave Indigenous Australians?
Well, look, first and foremost, most are the issues that I certainly highlight and would like to fix, where the billions of dollars are being spent year in, year out. Recognition is something that the Coalition has committed to for some time now, and committing to the processes is what it's all about. So making sure that all Australian people are on board with this proposition. The Prime Minister failed to hold constitutional conventions. In future, if it's the appetite of the Australian people to want to do this, then that's certainly what the commitment that's been made by Peter Dutton as well as David Littleproud.
I think the history books will also record the mistake of not legislating the Voice or putting together some draft legislation so the Parliament and the people could have a look at it. And this week I'm going to play some audio of Noel Pearson recently from 2021 where he said that in his own words, in his own voice, where he said, we need to legislate this thing, get some draft legislation together so we can all look at it and then we can look at having a referendum. Is that going to be one of the major mistakes recorded against the Prime Minister if this thing goes down?
Absolutely. This is absolutely something that the Prime Minister could have legislated at the get-go, but he decided not to. He could have demonstrated to the Australian people how this model might work and make a commitment in that way, but he failed to do that. Which is the biggest problem going forward, and certainly that marks a point. The
Prime Minister has now extended an olive branch on the Voice. He's now planning to set up a joint parliamentary committee to oversee legislation if it gets up at the referendum, and he wants the Coalition to co-chair the committee. So is this an act of goodwill or an act of desperation?
It's absolutely an act of desperation. We're past the point of having the opportunity to sit down in a bipartisan way to go over what this might look like. He failed to do so previously when it came to whether we split the questions. He's failed on a number of occasions to do so. This is desperation to appear as though he wants to work hand in hand with the Coalition. But we know, it'll speak for itself if a yes vote comes around, what'll actually happen.
What will happen the day after if it goes down?
Look, I think we'll have a nation divided, absolutely. There's a lot more that we'll have to do to bring our country together, and we have to start facing our issues as Australians and not divided along the lines of race. That's what we'll have to do. There'll be those who'll be very disappointed if they supported this all the way and see it as the only way forward. But I'd like to remind them that we belong to a wonderful country. There is still great, goodwill out there. There are other ways forward, and we can still do this.
I want to put on the record that you have issued some challenges through this show to debate people from the yes side. Linda Burney was first up, the Minister for Indigenous Australians. She declined. Dean Parkin, we've also invited Dean Parkin to debate you, Noel Pearson to debate you, and no one's taking up that offer. Why is that, do you think?
Because there's probably no detail in the voice. If they really believed in their proposition, then they would debate their proposition. They would put forward their argument, even against someone as such as myself. I mean, who's next? Would the Prime Minister come on board and debate me? Because I don't know why they wouldn't want to, if they believed in this so much, take the opportunity to debate it.
Is that an offer you're making this morning for a debate with Anthony Albanese live on the air?
Prime Minister, if you're happy to participate in debate with myself, then I'm happy to participate in a debate also.
We'll make the studio available. Jacinta Price is with us. Now, I was watching a documentary last night on Sky News that you made, and I want to play a few parts of it now if I can. You've spoken in this documentary about the way we care for Indigenous children and whether kids living in bad situations should be removed or should remain.
The argument has been put forward by some groups that when it comes to child protection, that, grandmothers should be able to have 15 kids sprawled out on mattresses in their home, and that's their idea of caring for children. Or, we don't do things the white fella way, we do it this way. And I don't believe that that's good enough. I think, our children are human beings. Their individual rights should be upheld like any other kids. And it's not good enough to say, well, that child is an Indigenous and their culture is more important, so therefore we cannot remove them from their culture. We have to keep them in a dysfunctional situation because their culture is their priority. No, that's not what should happen. What should happen is, in terms of true equality, the child's human rights need to be upheld like any other child.
So are you saying children in those situations should be removed?
If a child is living in a dysfunctional situation, absolutely. If their human rights aren't being met or upheld, they should be removed. I mean, we've seen recently a case of an 11-year-old being forced away from the foster parents that child's loved and been brought up with, to be taken to put back in kin care, and that child was taken away and put in a police van. That child's been re-traumatised again. And the loving foster parents, just because they weren't Indigenous, have been treated, like they're criminals. But this is the situation in places like the Northern Territory. Children are being re-traumatised because somebody in their family has put their hand up and said, I'll take that child, when they should remain in the loving home that they've been growing up in.
Is this one of the great challenges that you've got, living standards in some of these town camps that are so low and children living in such disadvantage? And if you were to take them out of that scenario, you could put them in a better situation, better living standards. However, then you're taking them away from their culture.
Yeah, and we don't, we only treat Aboriginal kids in this way because of the stigma due to the stolen generation. What happens is when you re-traumatise a child, the likelihood of them ending up in incarceration grows. So we should be creating well-rounded adults who can then grow up and find out more about their own identity. But if we keep re-traumatising children, we're failing them from the get-go. And this is what's happening to a lot of Indigenous kids and foster parents I know in the Northern Territory who are beside themselves because children are being re-traumatised, sexually abused again, and then taken back out and given back to the foster parents after they've been re-traumatised.
You're also, through this documentary, calling for a fresh investigation into what happened to your Aunt Marion, who died in January 1982. She was in a car with 4 men in a remote part of the Northern Territory. She was 14 at the time and never seen again. You've spoken about the case in this new documentary.
This story, knowing about this, I've known about it for a couple of years, and I really wanted to get to the bottom of it. And the more that I have come to learn about the circumstances around it, about those who have known about it themselves, but I guess felt helpless to do anything about it, the more I've felt, I guess, haunted by her. And just feeling like it's really unfair that that she can just be forgotten about completely. That is so unfair.
What do you believe happened to Marion?
I believe that she was murdered by her then promised husband for, not wanting to be married off at the age of 14 to somebody who had already murdered his first wife and done time. And she was forced into that marriage by her father, who was a leading land rights activist, chairman of the Land Council, a celebrated individual who had a state funeral last year and who took to his grave what happened to his daughter.
It's 25 minutes after 7 o'clock, and I'm sure that is going to receive some more attention throughout the day and throughout the week. Jacinta Price is our guest in the studio. Jacinta, I want to play to you some messages you've received. These are voicemail messages that have been left on your mobile phone.
Who knew, eh? Uncle Tom Coconut. Hate your own people. Well, what a disgrace. Absolutely disgraceful, disgusting human being you are, Uncle Tom Coconut.
You received that on your mobile phone?
Yes, yep. That was, there's obviously worse ones than that that I received, and the messages that have come through. And it's just remarkable how human beings feel they have the right to be aggressive and abusive and disgusting and horrible.
Here are some more messages you've received.
Off, you Enterprise. Don't message me on my telephone with your lying message. You're a woman.
Who leaked your mobile phone number online?
Oh, there's a couple of individuals who did so on Twitter and on other platforms, and I've got their details, so they've been reported to police.
Were you rattled by those messages? Not really?
I've had so many people be abusive and horrible toward me over the years, and it doesn't surprise me. I know what human beings are capable of. I just think, wake up to yourselves. I've been campaigning for the betterment of the lives of our most vulnerable who are silenced because of violent perpetrators. And I won't put up with perpetrators sending me messages like that.
When they call you a coconut, that means you're white on the inside and dark on the outside.
Yeah, it's a racial, abusive racial term that's used against, it's been used against myself, Warren Mundine. We can't just be seen as human beings in our own right. People like to look at us in terms of colour, and it's just, there's no place for it.
For the benefit of any of those people leaving messages on your voicemail, you're not going to be bullied?
Hell no, I am not going to be bullied. I'm here because there are people who are worse off than I am. I need to be their vessel, their voice, because if I don't, well, who else is going to? So, reflect upon your behaviour yourselves and sort out your own backyard. That's what I'll say.
Have you got a new mobile number?
I do.
We appreciate you coming to the studio as always, and we'll talk again between now and October 14.
Thanks, Ben.
And for the record, Noel Pearson's been invited back into the studio. So is Dean Parkin, the leader of the Yes 23 campaign. And the invitation is there to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, PM. If you'd like to debate Jacinta Price, we've got the studio waiting for you.